Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I have a few different questions about the flat earth movement. One question is, can I offer a critique of the film Behind the Curve, a 2018 documentary about the flat earth movement, and can I talk about some myths of the flat earth movement? So I'll answer both those questions in this video. So first, taking a look at this movie, Behind the Curve. We see here that it's been called a documentary about science, specifically a documentary about the scientific method being misunderstood, but it's also been called a documentary about mental health. So it's kind of interesting and in a way kind of controversial. Now, the people in the documentary were real, so I just want to make it clear that I'm not diagnosing anybody, just speculating on what could have been happening in a situation like this. Now, I've talked about this before, about mental health and the flat earth movement. Any given flat earther, that is a person who believes in the flat earth ideology, may have no mental disorder, they may have one or more mental disorders, they may have personality traits within a normal range, or extreme personality traits. Evaluation can only be done by a professional, in person, and in the context of a counselor-client relationship. So as I move to my critique of the film, I just want to issue this spoiler alert because I will be talking about a lot of different components we see in the film. Now, in terms of the documentary, I actually liked it in general. It was about 90 minutes long, and I think they could have got the job done in about an hour, but still, even at 90 minutes, I did like it. We saw some moments where the non-mental health experts in the movie, the experts from other disciplines like physics and engineering, still weighed in on the mental health aspects, which I don't think set the best example, but again, overall I think the film was well done, and actually the topic was fairly important. Some have argued this movie really tried to make fun of flat earthers, but I didn't really see it in that way. Yes, I mean, there were moments where the flat earth believers kind of said things that really didn't make sense in terms of what was going on in the film and in terms of what they were saying in terms of their own beliefs. Like, they kind of contradicted their own beliefs, or maybe in a few moments discovered for kind of a brief time that maybe their ideology wasn't logical, but then they kind of went back to their beliefs. So it may look like the film was making fun of them, but I don't really think that was the purpose of the film. Now, in talking about the myths, some of the myths of the flat earth movement, I'll be going through 7 myths here, and many of these are really tied to what we saw in the film, and I'm going to try to tie these myths back to the film whenever I can. So, myth number 1. Myth number 1 is that the flat earth movement is not a movement at all. But actually, it is a movement, and it's also a conspiracy theory. We hear that it's just a scientific exploration, right? A theory. Several scientifically minded people working on a project. But that's really not what's happening. There is actually an us against them mentality, meaning us, the scientific community, and them, the flat earthers. And this is referred to as essentially the difference between good and evil in the film. So it's really not simply a promotion of scientific thinking. The flat earth movement is rather an expansion of ideology. And if you're trying to expand an ideology, you're part of a movement. Now, at the same time as being a movement, it's also a conspiracy theory. It's rare to find a flat earther who also doesn't believe in several other conspiracy theories. We see this mentioned in the film around the role of the CIA and the FBI and the anti-vaccination movement as well. So when somebody is a flat earther, if you talk to somebody like that, most of the time you're going to find they subscribe to a lot of other conspiracy theories, some of which kind of go along with the flat earth conspiracy theory. For example, many of them believe specifically that the government is hiding things. If you look at the flat earth movement itself, if you look at the ideology, a key part of it is this idea that the government is hiding information that would show the earth is flat. So, in terms of the movement piece and the conspiracy piece, we see that it is both a movement and a conspiracy theory. Now, myth number 2 is that flat earthers are simply skeptical, right? These are just individuals who are high in skepticism. Well, scientists are simply skeptical. right? Flat earthers need to believe the earth is flat. They're part of a community. Skeptics are always looking to prove and disprove theories, and they're open to evidence that would serve to prove or disprove the theories. Flat earthers ignore evidence that would serve to disprove their theory and accept evidence that supports their theories. Essentially, a more extreme manifestation of confirmation bias. If we believe something, we tend to only look at information that supports that belief. Everyone does this. We see it a bit more here with the flat earthers. Myth number 3 is that flat earthers are simply at a disadvantage because they don't have the financial resources, knowledge about the scientific method, or access to equipment to run proper experiments. We see some good examples of how this is a myth in the film. We see that the one flat earther has access to a $20,000 laser gyroscope. We see another flat earther has access to a laser that he shot across the water. And although this experiment failed because the beam expanded too much, he understood the experiment failed and came back to do a similar experiment with a camera and a light. I would argue that many flat earthers actually do understand the technical aspects of the scientific method. They just fail to use it. So technically they understand how it works, but they do not understand the principles that drive the entire method. So they can see the small picture, but not the big picture. So now moving to myth number 4. This myth says that flat earthers are unintelligent. This actually isn't the case. Intelligence isn't really related to extreme personality traits or mental illness. Again, not every flat earther would have personality abnormalities or mental illness. But when we look at personality difficulties and mental illness, we see that they can interfere with the application of intelligence. For example, lack of insight. There's an unwillingness to believe or not believe in certain principles. So, in essence, dogmatic thinking, which of course one could argue is the same thing as having some sort of interference in terms of intellectual ability. But I view this differently. When applying cognitive reasoning to other situations, flat earthers actually function fairly well. They function well in society. We saw in the film a guy who was making these really complex models. He worked on his motorcycle. We saw that engineer who operated the $20,000 laser gyroscope, and the guy with both the laser and the camera. These individuals seemed to function fairly well, and a number of individuals in the documentary actually appeared to function well in society. Myth number 5 is that the flat earth movement is the fault of scientists. In a way, this is brought up in the film around this idea of the scientific community failing to communicate in a compassionate and understanding way with the flat earth movement. And although it's noble to accept responsibility on behalf of the scientific community, this is a myth. This isn't the fault of scientists. A predictable portion of the population at any given time will believe in a number of conspiracy theories. I do think, however, that compassion is important, and I'll talk about this more in a moment. Myth number 6 is that we just need to keep bombarding flat earthers with facts, right? Meaning the scientific community. I certainly think it's a good idea to make facts available and to present them in a way where a wide variety of people can understand them. But ultimately, bombarding flat earthers with facts will change nothing about their beliefs. Or in some cases, it might actually make their beliefs more entrenched, because the facts that contradict their beliefs become evidence themselves of a larger conspiracy theory. We see in the film how they react to evidence. With that laser gyroscope and the camera experiments, we see that both of those experiments actually offer strong evidence that the Earth is in fact spherical. I mean, in general, I'm not a physicist or anything, of course, but in general they look like they were fairly good experiments. And the flat earthers themselves conducted those experiments. Now, the one said that he would have to work to prove his own findings weren't true when he found with the laser gyroscope that the Earth did seem to be rotating. So we see here that a lack of evidence isn't really the problem. Myth number 7. This is that flat earthers are dangerous. Generally, no. They're no more dangerous than anyone else. And I think this is really the wrong way to think about this situation. We see this touched on in the film just a little bit when one of the flat earthers was reading about a classroom where about a third of the students kind of went against the teacher when the teacher said the Earth was spherical. The idea here is that somehow this ideology is spreading, kind of contaminating the population, and that even flat earthers themselves may take extreme actions. That wasn't really covered in the film, but I've seen this argued before. So the individuals could be dangerous, and the ideology could be dangerous. Now what we see is this type of thinking of these individuals as dangerous, only pushes them more to the fringes of society. It makes them excluded, ridiculed, and feared. All conspiracy theories come at some sort of cost. Some are more obvious than others. For example, the anti-vaccination conspiracy theory I think is a lot more dangerous than the flat earth conspiracy theory. But labeling flat earthers as dangerous simply isn't supported by the evidence, and I don't really see any strong evidence that the ideology is expanding at some incredible rate, and we have a lot of the population rebelling against the idea that the earth is spherical. I think a more useful way to think about this is to offer compassion, accept flat earthers as people, maintain a respectful dialogue, refuse to make fun of them. Ridiculing flat earthers is not logical, and it achieves no meaningful goal. I think the compassion route makes a lot more sense, and for some, I think it's about access to mental health care. I think making sure that access is available makes more sense than all these various types of judgment and labeling. In the end, flat earthers are really just individuals who believe something that a lot of other people don't believe, because the evidence doesn't really support those beliefs, right? Most people believe the earth is spherical because the evidence supports it. So we have this small group that doesn't believe it, even though there's this contradictory evidence. That's not indicative of some sort of major problem. And I think among all the trends I've seen, again, the idea of ridiculing them, making fun of them, this really, I find, is so destructive. As somebody who works as an active mental health clinician, somebody who treats people with all kinds of beliefs, I don't find this as a good strategy. Again, accepting flat earthers as human beings, because they are human beings, makes sense and has a better chance of leading to change if that's the objective. If changing the belief is the objective, that'll do it a lot better than judgment. Now, I know whenever I talk about the flat earth movement and these other issues, there are going to be a lot of different opinions. Some people will agree with me, some people will disagree with me. Please put those opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They're sure to generate a really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of the Behind the Curve film and myths about flat earthers to be interesting. Thanks for watching.